Hell's Angel found a little girl locked in the attic. What she said shocked him. The rumble of the motorcycle cut through the stillness of the countryside like thunder rolling across an empty plain. Ray Callahan leaned into a gentle curve, his weathered hands gripping the handlebars with the easy confidence of a man who had spent more years on the road than off it. The black leather vest on his back displayed the colors and patches that told a story without words. Hell's Angel, 45 years of life, and enough miles to circle the earth. The highway stretched before him, a ribbon of gray cutting through fields of gold. Farmland surrounded him on all sides, cornstalks swaying in the gentle breeze. The midday sun beat down, warming his shoulders through the leather. Ray breathed in deeply, tasting dust and summer heat. These lonely rides had become his ritual, his escape, his normal. The road didn't ask questions. The road didn't care about his past. The road just went on, mile after mile, offering the promise of somewhere else, even if that somewhere wasn't much different from what he'd left behind. "Just me and you, girl," Ray murmured to his bike, patting the fuel tank. The Harley had been his faithful companion for 12 years now. She knew his weight, his habits, the way he leaned into turns. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. His thoughts drifted as the miles rolled by. Another town behind him. Nothing ahead but open country. Ray had stopped counting the places he'd been through, the faces that blurred together. He'd stopped expecting connections to last. People came. People went. The road remained. Ray frowned as he felt a slight hesitation in the bike's engine. He glanced down at the fuel gauge and cursed under his breath. The needle hovered too close to empty. He'd gotten lost in his thoughts and forgotten to watch his fuel level. "Rookie mistake," he muttered to himself, scanning the horizon for signs of civilization. The last gas station was at least 20 miles back, and he wasn't sure how much farther until the next town. The Harley coughed once, then recovered. A warning. Ray eased off the throttle, trying to conserve what fuel remained. Running out here, miles from anywhere, would mean a long, hot walk, pushing a heavy bike. Not how he wanted to spend his afternoon. The weight of solitude pressed on him suddenly. No one knew where he was. No one was expecting him anywhere. If he broke down on this empty stretch of highway, there would be no worried phone calls, no search parties. Just a man and a silent machine under a wide, indifferent sky. Ray shook the thought away. He'd chosen this life, hadn't he? The freedom of answering to no one. The clean simplicity of carrying everything you needed on your back, of leaving without goodbyes. Sometimes, though, in quiet moments like this, the freedom felt hollow. An empty room could feel the same as an open road if you were always alone in it. The bike sputtered again, more insistent this time. "Come on, girl. Just a little farther," Ray urged, his voice rough from disuse. He crested a small hill, and the landscape opened up before him. Fields stretched to the horizon, dotted here and there with clusters of trees. And there, off to the right, maybe half a mile down a dirt road, stood a farmhouse. Old by the look of it. 2 stories of fading white paint and a wraparound porch. A red barn leaned nearby, weathered but solid. Ray slowed the bike, considering his options. The farmhouse meant people. People meant directions. Maybe even a spare gallon of gas if he was lucky. The Harley made the decision for him, coughing and stuttering. Ray guided it onto the dirt road, sending a plume of dust rising behind him like a signal flag. The bike seemed to limp now, engine protesting with every rotation. As Ray approached the farmhouse, details came into focus. Curtains in the windows, a rocking chair on the porch. Flower boxes, though the blooms looked wilted in the summer heat. Signs of life, but quiet ones. No children playing in the yard, no cars in the drive. He rolled to a stop at the edge of the graveled area in front of the house, cutting the engine. The sudden silence felt heavy. Even the birds seemed to have paused their songs. Ray swung his leg over the bike and stood, stretching his back after hours of riding. He pulled off his helmet and ran a hand through his short, graying hair. The farmhouse waited, still and silent under the midday sun. Ray squared his shoulders and started toward the porch. Just a quick stop, he told himself. Directions, maybe some gas. Then, back on the road. Yet something about the stillness made the hair on his neck stand up. Just nerves, he thought. Too many hours alone with his thoughts. Ray climbed the porch steps, boots heavy on the wooden boards. He approached the door, raised his hand, and knocked. Ray's knuckles rapped against the wooden door, the sound sharp in the quiet afternoon. He shifted his weight and glanced back at his motorcycle, sitting silent and thirsty at the edge of the yard. The leather of his vest creaked slightly as he rolled his shoulders, waiting. For a long moment, nothing happened. Ray was about to knock again when he heard movement inside, light footsteps approaching. The door opened just enough to reveal a woman in her late 30s, her brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of him, taking in his size, his leather vest with the Hells Angels patches, the tattoos visible on his forearms. "Can I help you?" Her voice was pleasant enough, but something about it sounded rehearsed, like a line she had practiced. Ray cleared his throat. "Sorry to bother you, ma'am. My bike's running low on fuel, and I'm not sure how far the next town is." He gestured toward the Harley. "Was hoping you might point me in the right direction." The woman's eyes darted past him to the motorcycle, then back to his face. She didn't open the door any wider. "Oh, you're quite a ways out." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "The nearest gas station would be in Millfield. That's about 15 miles east of here." She pointed vaguely down the road. Ray nodded. 15 miles. You think I'll make it on what I've got?" The woman shrugged slightly. "I wouldn't know about motorcycles, I'm afraid." Ray studied her face. She was attractive in a careful sort of way, but there was tension around her mouth, in the set of her shoulders, like someone playing a part they hadn't fully rehearsed. "Don't suppose you'd have a spare gallon of gas? For the lawnmower, maybe? I'd be happy to pay you for it." The woman's smile tightened. "We don't keep extra fuel around. Fire hazard, you know?" She glanced over her shoulder, back into the house. "I really should get back to what I was doing." Ray noticed she hadn't opened the door more than a foot during their entire conversation. Behind her, the house seemed unnaturally quiet. No TV sounds, no radio, no signs of anyone else. "Sure, I understand. Thanks for the directions." Ray took a step back. "This is a nice place you've got. Been here long?" A flicker of something, annoyance, worry, crossed her face. "A few years. My husband's family owned it before." "Your husband around?" Ray asked, keeping his tone casual. "He's away on business." Her answer came too quickly. "Listen, I really need to go now. Good luck with your bike." She started to close the door. "Thanks again," Ray said, but he was already talking to the closed door. Ray stood on the porch for a moment, frowning. Something felt off about the whole exchange. The woman's nervousness, the silent house, the way she kept looking over her shoulder. Maybe she was just wary of strangers. A woman alone in an isolated farmhouse had reason to be cautious, especially when the stranger looked like him. He turned and walked back to his bike, mentally calculating if 15 miles was possible on the fuel he had left. Probably not. He might have to push the bike the last few miles. Ray had just reached his motorcycle when he heard it. So faint he almost missed it. A voice, high and sweet, singing a melody he couldn't quite make out. It was coming from above, from the farmhouse. He stopped, listening harder. The singing continued, soft but clear. A child's voice, it sounded like. Ray turned back toward the house, his eyes traveling upward. The second floor had several windows, all with curtains drawn. But there, at the very top of the house, was a small window tucked under the eaves. An attic window. The singing was coming from there. Ray stood very still, listening. The stepmother had been alone, she'd implied. No mention of any children. Yet someone young was definitely singing up there, in what sounded like the attic. The voice continued, the melody unfamiliar, but haunting. Ray felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. His instincts, honed by years on the road and a lifetime of watching for trouble, were sending him clear signals now. Something was wrong in that farmhouse. Ray walked back toward the porch, moving quietly this time, his eyes fixed on that small attic window. The singing had stopped, but his suspicion remained. Ray circled the farmhouse, moving with the quiet confidence of a man used to watching his surroundings. His heavy boots made barely a sound on the dry grass as he listened for the singing to start again. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property, and somewhere in the distance, a crow called out. He paused at the corner of the house, keeping close to the weathered siding. There it was again, the soft, lilting voice of a child floating down from above. The melody had no words he could make out, just a gentle humming that rose and fell like someone trying to comfort themselves. Ray's jaw tightened. Something about that singing pulled at him. It wasn't playful or carefree. It carried a loneliness that felt too familiar. He moved to the back of the house where an old oak tree provided some cover. The singing grew slightly louder here. Ray looked up, trying to pinpoint exactly where the sound was coming from. The small attic window he'd spotted earlier was partly open, just a crack, as if someone had been desperate for a breath of fresh air. "What are you hiding, lady?" Ray muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the side of the house. A wooden trellis covered with withered vines ran up one wall, stopping just below a section of the house that jutted out slightly. Some kind of addition that had been built onto the main structure. It looked older than the rest, with siding that had weathered differently. Ray approached it carefully, glancing back toward the front of the house to make sure the woman wasn't watching. The singing had stopped again, but Ray was certain now. Someone young was up in that attic, someone the woman hadn't mentioned. He examined the addition more closely. It was shoddily constructed, the wood joining the main house showing signs of water damage. Ray ran his fingers along the seam where the structures met and found a panel that moved slightly under his touch. "Well, hello there," he whispered, pressing his fingers more firmly against the loose section. The panel shifted, revealing a small gap. It wasn't a proper entrance, more like a place where repairs had never been finished properly. Ray peered through, but could see nothing except darkness beyond. He looked around the yard one more time. No movement at any of the windows, no sign of the woman. The house remained eerily still, except for the occasional sound of the wind moving through the trees. Ray took a deep breath and tested the loose panel with both hands. It resisted at first, then gave way with a soft groan of protesting wood. The opening was larger than he'd first thought, big enough for a man to squeeze through if he was determined enough. And Ray was determined. The singing started again. So faint now he wondered if he was imagining it. But it pulled at him, that small voice in the darkness, like it was calling him specifically. Ray had spent most of his life avoiding other people's problems. The road had been his escape from attachments, from responsibilities that went beyond his brotherhood. He'd learned long ago that getting involved usually meant getting hurt. But something about this situation, the woman's nervousness, the hidden singing, the secrets this house seemed to hold, wouldn't let him walk away. He crouched down and peered into the opening. A musty smell drifted out, the scent of a space long closed off. Ray pulled the small flashlight from his pocket that he always carried for bike repairs and shined it inside. The beam revealed rough wooden beams and what looked like the underside of floor joists. "I'm either being really stupid or really smart," Ray muttered to himself as he widened the opening further, pulling the panel back until the gap was just big enough for his broad shoulders. The singing had stopped again, but Ray could feel someone waiting above, someone who might need help. With one last look over his shoulder to make sure he wasn't being watched, Ray tucked his flashlight between his teeth and began to squeeze his large frame through the opening. The wood scraped against his leather vest as he pulled himself into the darkness, feeling his way forward with careful hands. Ray pulled himself through the tight opening, his large frame barely fitting through the gap in the wall. Splinters caught on his leather vest as he worked his way into the darkness. The musty air filled his lungs, making him suppress a cough as his eyes adjusted to the dim light. The space was narrow at first, some kind of crawl space between walls, but it opened up ahead where a crude ladder of wooden slats had been nailed to the beams. Ray aimed his flashlight upward, following the path toward where the singing had come from. "Here goes nothing," he whispered to himself, tucking the flashlight into his vest pocket and beginning to climb. The wood creaked under his weight, but held firm. At the top of the makeshift ladder, Ray found a small trapdoor. It wasn't locked, just a simple wooden panel that pushed up easily when he pressed his palm against it. He lifted it slowly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten whoever was on the other side. Soft light filtered through the opening. Ray poked his head up cautiously, scanning the space above. The attic stretched before him, illuminated only by thin beams of sunlight streaming through a small, dirty window and the cracks between roof shingles. Dust particles danced in the light, swirling with each breath he took. And there, sitting cross-legged on a faded quilt in the center of the attic floor, was a little girl. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't even looking surprised to see a strange man climbing into her space. Instead, she simply watched him with large, serious eyes that seemed to take in everything about him at once. Ray froze halfway through the opening, suddenly unsure of himself. The girl was tiny, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and a thin face that looked like it hadn't seen enough sunlight or food. She wore a simple cotton dress that hung loosely on her small frame, and her bare feet were tucked neatly under her. Hey there," Ray said softly, his gruff voice sounding strange, even to his own ears. He was used to the roar of motorcycles and the rough banter of his fellow bikers, not talking to children. The girl didn't answer. She didn't run. She didn't even move. She just continued watching him with those thoughtful eyes. Ray pulled himself fully into the attic, moving slowly as he crouched on the rough wooden floor. The ceiling was too low for him to stand upright, so he stayed in a hunched position, trying to make himself look less intimidating. "My name's Ray," he offered, keeping his distance. "I heard you singing." The girl tilted her head slightly, studying his face. A tiny smile flickered at the corners of her mouth. "I'm Emma," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, but surprisingly clear. Ray glanced around the attic. A small pile of children's books sat near her quilt. A plastic cup of water and an empty plate rested nearby. A bucket in the corner served an obvious purpose. There was nothing else. No toys, no comforts, just the bare essentials for survival. "Emma," Ray repeated, the name feeling strange on his lips. "You live up here?" Emma nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. "I have to stay here to behave," she explained, as if this was the most normal thing in the world. Ray felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd seen enough in his life to recognize when something was deeply wrong. "Who put you up here, Emma?" Instead of answering, Emma began humming again, the same gentle melody he'd heard from outside. Then she stopped abruptly and looked directly into his eyes. "You have kind eyes," she said, with the straightforward honesty only a child could manage. "Even though you try to look scary." Ray blinked, taken aback by her perception. Most people saw only what he wanted them to see: the tough exterior, the dangerous biker. But this little girl had seen through it in seconds. "Emma," he tried again, "does your mom know you're up here?" Emma shook her head. "Not my mom. My stepmom put me here." She said the word carefully, like she was still getting used to it. "Dad's gone away. He didn't come back." Ray felt his chest tighten. The picture was becoming clearer, and he didn't like what he was seeing. Emma leaned forward slightly, her small hands folded in her lap. Her eyes brightened with something that looked like hope as she studied his face. "You came on the right day," she whispered. "I was starting to forget how to be brave." Ray stared at her, completely stunned by her words. The simple statement hit him like a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. This tiny child, locked in an attic, was talking about bravery. To him, a man who'd faced down rival gangs without flinching. Ray sat back on his heels, trying to process what Emma had just said. He'd seen a lot in his years on the road, but something about this little girl's quiet strength hit him differently than anything before. "How long have you been up here, Emma?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle. Emma's small fingers traced patterns in the dust beside her. "A long time. Since the leaves fell off the trees. Now they're back again." She pointed toward the tiny window, where a branch with fresh green leaves was visible. Ray did the math in his head. Months. This child had been here for months. "Are you hungry? Thirsty?" he asked, noticing how thin her arms were. "She brings me food twice a day," Emma said simply. "And water. I'm not allowed to ask for more." Ray clenched his jaw, fighting to keep his face neutral. He didn't want to scare her with his anger. "Does she ever let you out of here?" Emma shook her head slowly. "Not anymore. I was bad." "Bad how?" Ray couldn't imagine what a 6-year-old could do to deserve this. Emma's eyes dropped to her lap. "I asked questions. About Dad. About where he went." Her voice had gotten so quiet, Ray had to lean forward to hear her. "She said questions make her head hurt." Ray nodded slowly, trying to look casual, while his mind raced. He needed to get this child out, but he had to be careful. If the stepmother realized he'd found Emma, there was no telling what she might do. "I'm going to help you, Emma," he said, the decision made before he even realized it. "But I need to understand what's happening here." For the first time, Emma's composure slipped. Her eyes widened with fear. "You can't take me now," she whispered urgently. "She'll know someone was here. She always checks." "Checks what?" Ray asked. Emma gestured around the attic. "Everything. The floor, the window, my food." She pointed to the small plate. "She counts my crackers." Ray felt sick. This was more than neglect. This was calculated cruelty, meticulous control over a child who couldn't defend herself. "Emma, I promise I'll come back," Ray said. "But I need to get help. The right kind of help." Emma crawled forward on her knees until she was closer to him. Her movements were careful, like someone who had learned to be very quiet. "You can't talk loud," she warned, her voice barely audible. She pointed to the far corner of the attic. "She listens through the vent." Ray followed her gesture and noticed a small metal grate in the wall that he'd overlooked before. It appeared to connect to the ventilation system of the house. "She put it there to hear me," Emma continued, "to make sure I'm being good." Ray nodded his understanding, lowering his voice to match Emma's whisper. "How often does she check on you?" "Morning and night," Emma said. "She brings food and then listens. Sometimes she stays by the vent for a long time if I make any noise." "And what do you do all day?" Ray asked, glancing at the small stack of worn books. Emma's face brightened slightly. "I read my books. I know all the words now. And I sing, but only when I hear her car leave." She pointed to the tiny window again. "I can see the driveway from here." Ray was struck by her resourcefulness. This wasn't just survival. It was adaptation. This little girl had created a system for herself, learning the patterns of her captor. "Emma," Ray said carefully, "have you been pretending? To make her think you're behaving?" Emma nodded, a flicker of pride crossing her face. "I'm very good at it. I say, 'Yes, ma'am,' and 'Thank you,' even when I'm scared." She leaned even closer to Ray, her eyes intense. "I remember everything. When she walks, when she leaves, what makes her mad. She sat back slightly, her small shoulders straightening. I had to be smart. I had to wait. Wait for what? Ray asked. For someone who could help, she said simply. Someone she couldn't scare away. Ray moved silently across the attic floor, careful to avoid the places where the boards creaked. He knelt by the vent Emma had pointed out, running his fingers along the metal edges. It was well installed, not some makeshift addition. This had been planned. How long has this been here? He whispered, tapping the grate lightly. Emma hugged her knees to her chest. Since I came up here. She put it in the first night. Her voice was barely audible. Said it was so she could hear if I needed anything. Ray's jaw tightened. The woman had prepared this prison in advance. You said you memorized her routines, Ray said, returning to sit near Emma. What does that mean? Emma's eyes lit up slightly, like a student proud to show her work. She pointed to a small pile of dust in the corner. I made marks, she explained. Little lines for when the sun moves. I count how many times before she comes back. She demonstrated by drawing a line in the dust with her finger. She leaves at 8 little lines, then comes back at 12. Sometimes she stays home all day on the last day of the week. Ray was amazed. This child had created her own timekeeping system. And you listen to her walking? He asked. Emma nodded eagerly, almost forgetting to keep her voice down. Her shoes make different sounds. When they're loud and fast, she's angry. When they're soft and slow, she's tired. That's the best time because she doesn't check as careful. Ray glanced around the small space, seeing it with new eyes. What had initially looked like a bare attic was actually a carefully observed territory for Emma. She knew every inch, every sound, every pattern of light and shadow. The pipes make noise when she uses water, Emma continued, warming to her subject. And the big chair downstairs squeaks when she sits in it. I can hear the TV sometimes. That's real smart, Emma, Ray said, genuinely impressed. You've been paying close attention. Emma's face grew serious again. I had to. It's how I know when it's safe to sing or move around. She lowered her voice even further. And when to be extra quiet. Ray nodded, understanding what she wasn't saying. This child had learned to predict her captor's moods, to anticipate danger, a survival skill many adults never mastered. What about other people? He asked. Does anyone else ever come to the house? Emma shook her head. Just the mail lady. She honks when she leaves a box. Her eyes brightened momentarily. And now you. The simple statement hit Ray hard. The isolation of this child's existence suddenly became crystal clear. No neighbors checking in, no friends visiting, no one to notice a missing girl. Ray shifted his weight, trying to process everything. Emma, I need to get you out of here, but I need to be smart about it, like you've been. Emma's face fell, fear creeping back into her eyes. You can't just take me, she whispered urgently. She'll come after us. I'll get help, Ray promised. People who can make sure she never hurts you again. Emma shook her head vigorously, her thin shoulders trembling. No. She told me what happens if anyone finds out. Ray leaned closer. What did she tell you? Emma glanced nervously at the vent, then back to Ray. She said if I ever told anyone, if anyone ever found me here. Her voice caught. She said I'd disappear forever, like Dad did. The words hung in the still attic air. Ray felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't just about keeping a child locked away. There was something darker beneath the surface. What happened to your dad, Emma? He asked carefully. Emma's eyes filled with tears for the first time since he'd found her. I don't know. He was here, and then he wasn't. She wiped at her eyes with dusty fingers. But I heard them fighting. And then there was a loud noise. And the next day, she said he left us. She looked up at Ray, her eyes suddenly intense despite the tears. If she knows you saw me, she won't let me live here anymore. Ray descended the makeshift ladder as quietly as he'd climbed it. Before leaving Emma, He'd given her shoulder a gentle squeeze and whispered, "I'll be back. Stay strong." The trust in her eyes nearly broke something inside him. Something he thought had hardened years ago. Back on solid ground, he carefully secured the loose panel. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the yard. He took a deep breath and walked around to the front of the house, his motorcycle boots crunching on the gravel. His mind raced. He needed to appear normal, unsuspicious. Just a biker passing through who needed directions, and nothing more. Ray adjusted his leather vest and ran a hand through his gray-streaked hair. Years of keeping his emotions hidden would serve him well now. The front door opened before he reached it. The stepmother stood there, arms folded across her chest. "I was wondering where you'd gone off to," she said, her voice pleasant, but her eyes sharp and assessing. "Did you get lost?" Ray forced a casual smile. "Sorry about that. Nature called. Your property backs up to some nice woods." She didn't return his smile. "Most people ask to use the bathroom." "Most people aren't bikers, ma'am," Ray countered easily. "We're used to making do with what's available." This seemed to satisfy her, or at least she pretended it did. Her posture relaxed slightly, but her eyes remained watchful. "Did you figure out which way you're heading?" she asked. Ray nodded. "Yeah, think I got my bearings now. Appreciate the help." He paused, then added, "Nice place you got here. Pretty quiet." "That's why we chose it," she replied. "My husband and I wanted privacy." "Your husband around?" Ray asked, keeping his tone casual. Something flickered across her face. So brief, he almost missed it. "He travels for work, gone for weeks at a time." Ray nodded sympathetically. "Must get lonely out here by yourself." "I manage," she said shortly. Then, with a forced smile, "I value my solitude." Ray glanced up at the house, deliberately avoiding looking toward the attic. "Big place for one person." "It suits me," she replied, then checked her watch. "I don't mean to be rude, but I have dinner to prepare." "Of course," Ray said, taking a step back. "Thanks again for the directions." As he turned to walk away, he decided to take one small risk. "Hey, by the way," he said, turning back, "I thought I heard singing earlier. Was that your radio?" Her face remained perfectly composed, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped the doorframe. "Must have been the wind in the rafters. This old house makes all sorts of noises." "Yeah, probably," Ray agreed easily. "Take care now." He walked to his motorcycle, feeling her eyes boring into his back. He didn't rush, didn't glance back at the house until he'd swung his leg over his bike and started the engine. When he finally looked up, she was gone, the door firmly closed. Ray pulled away from the farmhouse, the rumble of his motorcycle cutting through the evening quiet. In his side mirror, he caught a glimpse of movement at one of the downstairs windows, the stepmother watching him leave. As the house grew smaller behind him, the weight in his chest grew heavier. Every instinct told him to turn around, to break down the door, to grab Emma and run. But that wasn't the smart play. Not with what Emma had said about disappearing forever. Not with the cold calculation he'd seen in the stepmother's eyes. The road curved, and the farmhouse vanished from view. Ray slowed his bike and pulled over, taking out his cell phone. No service. Of course. He pocketed it and stared at the darkening sky. "I'm coming back for you, kid," he promised, his words carried away by the evening breeze. "Just hang on a little longer." As dusk settled over the countryside, Ray Callahan, a man who had spent years avoiding connections and commitments, made a silent vow to a 6-year-old girl he'd just met. And somehow, it felt like the most natural thing he'd ever done. The neon sign outside the roadside motel flickered, casting an uneven red glow through the thin curtains. Ray lay on the sagging mattress, one arm behind his head, staring at the water stains on the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. Every time he closed his eyes, He saw Emma sitting cross-legged in that dim attic, her small face serious but calm, her voice soft but steady. "You came on the right day. I was starting to forget how to be brave." Ray rolled onto his side and punched the flat pillow into a more comfortable shape. The wall-mounted air conditioner rattled and wheezed, barely cooling the stuffy room. He'd stayed in 100 places like this over the years. Cheap motels where no one asked questions, and no one cared who you were. Usually they suited him fine. Tonight, the loneliness of the room pressed in on him. "I waited for someone like you, because you don't look scared of her." Her words kept circling in his mind. How long had that little girl been up there? How many days had she watched through cracks and listened through vents, waiting for someone, anyone, to notice she existed? Ray sat up and swung his legs over the side of the bed. He rubbed his face with both hands, feeling the rough stubble against his palms. The digital clock on the nightstand read 1:47 a.m. He reached for the plastic cup of water he'd left there and took a sip. What would happen to Emma if he called the police right now? Would they believe a man like him, a Hell's Angel with a past that wouldn't stand up to much scrutiny? Would they even find her if the stepmother hid her before they arrived? And what if they did believe him, took Emma away, but couldn't prove anything? Where would Emma end up then? "If she knows you saw me, she won't let me live here anymore." The threat hung in the air. Ray understood what Emma hadn't said, that not living here anymore didn't mean freedom. It meant something much worse. He stood up and paced the small room, his bare feet silent on the thin carpet. 3 steps, one way, 3 steps back. The walls felt like they were closing in. Ray had spent most of his adult life avoiding responsibilities that tied him down. No wife, no kids, no mortgage. Just his bike and the open road. Freedom was what he valued most. Yet here he was, unable to sleep because of a child he'd met just hours ago. He went to the window and pushed the curtain aside. His motorcycle stood alone in the parking lot, silver in the moonlight. How easy it would be to just get on it tomorrow and ride away. Head south maybe, find warmer weather, and forget he ever stopped at that farmhouse. But he knew he wouldn't. Something about Emma's quiet courage had reached inside him and touched a part he thought had died long ago. The way she'd studied his face, looking for signs she could trust him. The careful way she spoke, measuring each word. She wasn't just surviving in that attic. She was fighting in the only way a 6-year-old could. Ray let the curtain fall back and returned to sit on the edge of the bed. He needed a plan. Something better than just barging in or calling authorities who might not believe him. He needed proof. He needed to gain the stepmother's trust. He needed time. Outside, a semi-truck rumbled past on the highway. The neon sign buzzed and flickered again. Ray lay back down and folded his hands across his chest, thinking. By the time the first gray light of dawn seeped around the edges of the curtains, he'd made his decision. He would go back, not as a concerned stranger, but as someone with a reason to stick around. Someone who could gain access to the house. Someone who could earn the stepmother's trust while secretly gathering evidence. He showered quickly and dressed in his cleanest clothes. As he packed his few belongings into his saddlebags, Ray's mind was clearer than it had been in years. For the first time since he could remember, he wasn't just drifting. He had a purpose. The motel parking lot was empty as he started his motorcycle in the early morning light. The rumble of the engine felt like a promise. He would return to that farmhouse today, not just passing through, but with a plan. And he wouldn't leave until Emma was safe. The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel driveway as Ray guided his motorcycle back toward the farmhouse. He'd spent the early hours rehearsing his story, making sure every detail would sound natural. His leather jacket felt heavy in the growing heat, but he kept it on. The intimidating appearance that had followed him for years might actually help today. He pulled up to the house and cut the engine. The silence that followed seemed heavier than yesterday. Ray took a deep breath and approached the porch, noticing things he'd missed before. A broken step carefully painted to look solid, curtains that didn't quite match. The complete absence of children's toys in a yard where a child supposedly lived freely. Ray knocked on the door, his knuckles striking the peeling wood with purpose. A minute passed before it swung open. The stepmother stood there, her expression shifting from wariness to recognition. "You again?" she asked, her voice friendly, but eyes sharp. "Did you get lost after all?" Ray forced his face into a sheepish smile. "Actually, ma'am, my bike's acting up. Thought maybe I could use your phone to call for help. Cell reception out here is terrible." She hesitated, looking past him at the motorcycle. "It was running fine yesterday. Started making a funny noise about 5 miles back." Ray shrugged. "Rather catch it now than be stranded somewhere with no houses around." The woman studied him, her fingers tightening slightly on the doorframe. Ray maintained eye contact, keeping his expression open and harmless despite the churning in his gut. "I suppose you can use the phone," she finally said, stepping back. "It's in the kitchen." Ray entered, wiping his boots carefully on the mat. The house smelled of pine cleaner and something else, something stale. He followed her through a living room that looked barely lived in. No photos on the walls, no books or magazines scattered about. Everything too neat, too arranged. "Nice place," he commented casually. "Quiet out here." "We like our privacy," she replied, leading him into a kitchen with outdated appliances and spotless countertops. She gestured to an old corded phone on the wall. "There you go." Ray moved toward it, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Appreciate it. My buddy has a tow truck. Shouldn't take him long to get here." He picked up the receiver and dialed a number he knew wouldn't answer. As he pretended to talk, he scanned the kitchen. A calendar on the wall marked only with grocery on certain days. A single place setting drying in the dish rack. No children's cups or plates. No drawings stuck to the refrigerator. "He'll be about 30 minutes, Ray said after hanging up. "Mind if I wait outside?" "That's fine," she answered too quickly. "Actually, could I trouble you for some water first? It's getting hot out there." The woman's smile tightened, but she nodded. "Of course." As she reached for a glass, Ray noticed how she moved, efficiently, silently, like someone used to not making a sound, like Emma had described. He also noticed her eyes darting occasionally toward the ceiling, then quickly away. "Beautiful countryside around here," Ray commented, accepting the water. "You lived here long?" "A few years. My husband's job brought us here." She leaned against the counter, keeping space between them. "He at work now?" Ray asked casually, taking a sip. "He travels. Sails." Her answers were clipped, rehearsed. "Must get lonely out here," Ray offered. "Just you and your daughter, right?" Something flickered in the woman's eyes. Surprise, then caution. "Stepdaughter. She's visiting relatives right now." Ray nodded, mentally noting the contradiction with what he'd seen yesterday. "Kids need their family time." "How long's she been gone?" 2 weeks, she answered without hesitation. Too practiced. As Ray drank his water, a soft creak sounded from above, almost imperceptible. The stepmother's eyes darted upward for a fraction of a second, then back to Ray. Her fingers tapped once, twice against her arm before she forced them to stop. "Well, I should wait outside for that tow," Ray said, handing back the empty glass. "Thanks for your help." "No problem at all," she replied, the relief in her voice barely concealed. As Ray walked back toward the front door, he glanced at the ceiling, at the almost invisible outlines of what must be the attic access. Somewhere up there, Emma was waiting, watching. The urge to tear the place apart, to grab Emma and run, burned in his chest. Instead, he nodded politely and stepped outside. The stepmother closed the door behind him a little too quickly. Ray heard the distinct sound of a lock turning. Standing on the porch, he looked up at the roofline, at the small vent he now knew connected to the attic. Every instinct told him what he already knew. The woman was lying. There was no husband coming home. There was no stepdaughter visiting relatives. There was only Emma, trapped in the attic, invisible to the world. Ray waited in the woods behind the farmhouse until dusk. The minutes stretched like years as he watched the house, noting when lights turned on and off. The woman had left once, driving away for 30 minutes before returning with grocery bags. He memorized every detail. Which windows lit up, which stayed dark, the pattern of movement inside. When twilight deepened into evening shadows, Ray moved. He approached from the back, staying low, and avoiding the patches of gravel that might announce his presence. The loose panel he'd discovered yesterday was his target. In his backpack, he carried bottled water, sandwiches wrapped in paper, and a chocolate bar. Simple things that wouldn't make noise or leave obvious evidence. The night air felt cool against his face as he worked the panel loose. His fingers, calloused from years of mechanical work, found the edges easily this time. Ray paused, listening for any sound from inside the house. A television murmured distantly, some game show with occasional applause. Perfect cover. He slipped into the dark space behind the panel and carefully pulled it closed behind him. The climb up was harder in the dark, but Ray had spent enough years finding his way through unlit places. His boots found each foothold silently. The musty smell of neglect filled his nostrils as he ascended toward the attic. When he reached the top, he paused, whispering into the darkness. "Emma, it's Ray." A moment of silence stretched out. Then he heard a tiny shuffle. "Ray." Her voice was barely audible, uncertain. "It's me, kid. I came back." He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and switched it on, keeping the beam pointed downward. In the soft glow, he saw her emerge from behind a dusty trunk. She wore the same clothes as yesterday, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Her eyes were wide with surprise. "You really came back," she whispered, stopping a few feet away. "Said I would, didn't I?" Ray moved toward the center of the attic, where the ceiling was highest. He set his backpack down carefully. "Brought you something." Emma approached cautiously, watching his every movement. Ray unzipped the pack slowly, making sure she could see everything he took out. "Water," he said, placing the bottles on the floor. "Sandwiches, and—" He pulled out the chocolate bar. "Figured you might like something sweet." Emma looked at the items, then back at Ray. She'll know if she finds wrappers. The simple practicality of her concern hit him hard. A 6-year-old shouldn't have to think that way. "Got that covered," Ray said, pulling out a small plastic bag. "Everything goes in here. I'll take it with me when I leave." Emma nodded, impressed by his planning. She knelt down across from him, her movements careful and quiet from long practice. "Turkey and cheese," Ray said, holding out a sandwich. "Hope that's okay." She took it with both hands, examining it before taking a small bite. Her eyes closed briefly as she chewed. When was the last time she'd had fresh food? "It's really good," she whispered. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a few minutes as Emma ate, savoring each bite. Ray watched her, noting how deliberately she moved, how she paused to listen after any sound from below. "I've been thinking about how to help you," Ray said finally, keeping his voice just above a whisper. "But I need to know more. Can you tell me how long you've been up here?" Emma took a sip of water, considering. "Since winter, when there was snow. I counted days for a while, but then I stopped." "Months, then." Ray felt anger rising, but kept his face calm. "And your dad? Where is he?" "He went away on a trip." Her voice flattened. "She said he'd come back, but he never did. Then, she told me he wasn't coming back because I was bad." Ray's jaw tightened. "You're not bad, Emma." She looked up at him, studying his face as if searching for lies. "How do you know?" Because bad kids don't sit quiet when they're scared. They don't think about others. They don't share important information to help strangers. Ray leaned forward slightly. You're brave. That's different from bad. Emma's eyes widened slightly at his words. She took another bite of sandwich, thinking, I sing so I remember I'm still here, she confided suddenly. Sometimes it gets so quiet I think, maybe I disappeared. The simple statement broke something in Ray's chest. He nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Good plan, he finally said. I always know where to find you now. Emma finished her sandwich and reached cautiously for the chocolate bar. Ray watched as she unwrapped it carefully, her small fingers working methodically to make no sound. She broke off a tiny piece and put it in her mouth. Her eyes widened, and for the first time, her face relaxed into a small, genuine smile. The sight hit Ray harder than any punch he'd ever taken. I'll keep coming back, he promised quietly. And we're going to get you out of here. For good. Emma's smile remained, faint but real. She nodded once, and Ray saw what he hadn't fully noticed before, a spark of hope beginning to light her eyes. Ray returned to the attic that same afternoon. The house stood silent, with the stepmother's car gone from the driveway. He had watched from a distance until he saw her leave, counting the minutes to make sure she was truly gone before approaching. This time, Emma was waiting near the panel, her head tilting at the first sound of his arrival. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, though she remained quiet and still. Coast is clear for a while, Ray whispered, settling cross-legged on the dusty floor. She left about 20 minutes ago. Looked like she was dressed for something that might take time. Emma nodded, processing this information like a tiny tactician. She goes to her Thursday meeting. It takes 3 hours. Ray raised his eyebrows, impressed by her attention to detail. You keep good track of time up here. I count, Emma said simply. She pointed to a thin beam of sunlight that moved across the floor as the day progressed. And I watched that. Ray studied her face, noting the tension that never fully left her small shoulders. Even with the stepmother gone, Emma remained alert, her body ready to react. You know, Ray said carefully, I used to get real worked up sometimes, when things got tough. Had to learn ways to stay calm. Emma looked at him with interest. How? Got a few tricks. Ray held up his fingers. First one's breathing. Like this. He demonstrated, taking a slow breath through his nose, holding it briefly, then releasing it through slightly pursed lips. Emma copied him immediately, her small chest rising and falling. Good, Ray nodded. Now try this. He put 2 fingers to his lips and blew gently, producing a soft whistle. Emma's eyes widened. She tried, but only air came out. Takes practice, Ray explained. Curl your tongue a bit, like this. He showed her again, more slowly. For the next 15 minutes they sat together as Emma tried to master whistling. Her face scrunched in concentration, cheeks puffing with effort. Finally, a faint, breathy whistle emerged. I did it, she whispered, her face blooming with surprise and delight. Sure did, Ray said, a rare smile creasing his weathered face. Whistling's good for passing time, and nobody can take it from you. Emma nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in his words. She practiced a few more times, each whistle a little stronger than the last. Got another trick, Ray said. He began tapping his fingers against his knee in a simple pattern. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. He repeated the rhythm several times. It's counting music. Helps steady your mind when things get scary. Emma placed her small hand on her knee, mimicking his movements. Her timing was perfect. Ray wasn't surprised. This girl noticed everything. My mom taught me songs, Emma said suddenly, before she went to heaven. She said music stays in your heart, even when people leave. Ray's throat tightened. Your mom was right. Can you do rhythm with songs? Emma asked. Sure can. Ray began tapping out the rhythm to a simple lullaby. one his own mother had sung decades ago. Emma listened, then joined in, matching his pattern exactly. Then, very softly, she began to hum the melody that fit with it. The sound filled the dusty attic, not loud enough to be heard below, but clear in the space between them. They sat together in this quiet harmony, the afternoon light shifting slowly across the wooden floor. For just a moment, the attic wasn't a prison, but a sanctuary where two unlikely friends shared something simple and true. When the beam of light reached a certain board, Emma's signal that time was growing short, Ray began gathering his things. "Gotta go before she gets back," he said, checking to make sure he was leaving no trace. Emma nodded, the brief happiness fading from her face. "Will you come again?" "Count on it," Ray said firmly. As he prepared to slip back through the panel, Emma suddenly reached out. Her small fingers wrapped around his calloused hand for just a moment, a gesture so quick and light it might have been imagined. But Ray felt it like an electric current. She pulled back just as quickly, as though surprised by her own action. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Ray nodded once, understanding everything she couldn't say. Then he was gone, back through the panel and into the gathering dusk, carrying the weight of her trust like something precious and fragile. The sheriff's office in Millfield sat at the edge of town, a squat brick building with buzzing fluorescent lights and linoleum floors that squeaked under Ray's heavy boots. Night had fallen by the time he pushed through the glass doors, the clock on the wall reading 8:17 p.m. The front desk deputy looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to wariness as he took in Ray's appearance, the leather vest with its patches, the tattoos visible on his forearms, the hard set of his jaw. "Can I help you?" The deputy's hand drifted slightly toward his side. Ray noticed, but ignored the gesture. "Need to report a situation. Child endangerment." The deputy's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Take a seat. I'll get Officer Daniels." Ray lowered himself into a plastic chair that seemed too small for his frame. The waiting area smelled of coffee and floor cleaner. A bulletin board covered with wanted posters, and community notices hung on the wall. 5 minutes passed before a door opened. "Sir, I'm Officer Daniels." A woman in her 30s with her hair pulled back in a tight bun approached. "You wanted to report something about a child?" Ray stood up. "Yeah, girl being kept in an attic. Route 16, about 12 miles out of town. Old farmhouse, white with green trim." Officer Daniels blinked, then gestured toward a small interview room. "Let's talk in here." The room was bare except for a table and 3 chairs. Ray sat down, his broad shoulders making the space feel even smaller. "I'm going to need your name first," Daniels said, pulling out a notepad. "Ray Callahan." "ID?" Ray pulled out his wallet and slid his license across the table. Daniels studied it, typed something into her computer, and her expression changed slightly. "Mr. Callahan, tell me exactly what you saw." Ray described finding Emma in the attic, keeping his voice steady and factual. He mentioned the singing, the loose panel, the girl's strange calmness, and her warnings about being watched. "She's been up there a while," Ray said. "Thin, too pale. Knows all the routines of the house." Daniels took notes, but her face remained neutral. "And you were at this property because—" Bike was running low. Stopped to ask directions. "Then decided to check the attic?" Ray's jaw tightened. "Heard singing. Something felt wrong. And you didn't call us immediately because—" "Girl said she'd disappear if the stepmother knew she'd been found." Officer Daniels set down her pen. "Mr. Callahan, do you know the family? Any prior contact with them?" "No." "Any witnesses who saw you find this child?" "No." She leaned back slightly. "So you're reporting that you, a man with, let me check, 3 prior arrests, entered a private home without permission, supposedly found a child in the attic, then left without contacting authorities until now." The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. Ray's fingers curled against his palm. Got a name. Emma. Dark hair. Blue shirt. 6, maybe 7 years old. Did you take any photos? Any evidence of the situation? Didn't have time. Daniel sighed, flipping her notebook shut. Mr. Callahan, we take child welfare very seriously here. But I need more than this to obtain a warrant. You're not going to check? Ray's voice remained level, but his eyes hardened. I'll drive by tomorrow, see if anyone's home. Maybe ask some questions. She stood up. That's standard procedure, without stronger evidence. Ray rose to his feet slowly. Tomorrow might be too late. Is there something specific that makes you think this child is in immediate danger? Ray wanted to tell her everything. The fear in Emma's eyes, the way she counted minutes by sunlight, how she'd reached for his hand. But he knew how it would sound coming from him. Just know she is. Officer Daniels handed back his ID. Leave your contact information with the front desk. We'll follow up if we find anything concerning. Ray walked out, passing the front desk without stopping. The night air hit his face, cool and indifferent. His motorcycle waited in the parking lot, a dark silhouette against the streetlights. He stood there for a long moment, staring up at the stars barely visible through the town's light pollution. Emma was still in that attic, counting the hours, waiting for someone to believe she existed. Ray climbed onto his bike, but didn't start it immediately. Instead, he pulled out his phone and opened the camera app, checking its settings. If the law needed evidence, he would get it, whatever it took. The engine roared to life, and Ray pulled away from the sheriff's office, his mind already planning his return to the farmhouse. He'd need to be smarter this time, more careful. And he'd need proof no one could ignore. Morning mist hung low over the fields as Ray positioned himself at the edge of a small grove of trees, about 200 yards from the farmhouse. He'd arrived before sunrise, parking his motorcycle a half-mile down the road and walking the rest of the way through damp grass. The air was cool, heavy with dew. Ray sat with his back against an old oak tree, a pair of binoculars in his hands, and a small notebook in his jacket pocket. He'd learned long ago how to stay still, how to become almost invisible when needed. Those skills had saved his life more than once. Today, they might save Emma's. The farmhouse looked peaceful in the soft morning light, white paint peeling slightly at the corners, green trim faded from years of sun and rain. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney. To anyone driving by, it would look like a perfectly ordinary country home. Maybe a bit worn down, but nothing unusual. Ray knew better. At 6:42 a.m., lights flickered on in what Ray guessed was the kitchen. Through the binoculars, he could see a shadow moving behind the curtains. The stepmother, already awake. He made a note in his small notebook. By 7:15, she emerged onto the back porch, dressed in jeans and a button-up shirt, her hair pulled back. She carried a basket of laundry to a clothesline stretched between two posts in the yard. Ray watched her pin each item methodically, her movements efficient and practiced. Nothing about her seemed obviously threatening. That was the problem with people like her, Ray thought. They looked normal on the outside. At 8:30, a blue pickup truck pulled into the driveway. A man, middle-aged, wearing work clothes, got out and approached the house. The stepmother met him at the door. They talked briefly, then walked together to the barn behind the house. Ray scribbled in his notebook. Male visitor, regular, boyfriend, worker. The pair spent about 45 minutes in the barn before emerging. The man carried a box to his truck, while the woman followed, talking and gesturing with her hands. They seemed comfortable with each other, suggesting a routine relationship of some kind. When the truck pulled away, Ray checked his watch. 9:22 a.m. The woman returned to the house. For the next hour, not much happened. Ray shifted his position occasionally to keep his legs from cramping, never taking his eyes off the property for more than a few seconds. At 10:37, something changed. The stepmother came out carrying a tray. Ray focused his binoculars, watching closely as she walked to an external cellar door on the side of the house. A door Ray hadn't noticed during his previous visits. She set the tray down, unlocked the door with a key from her pocket, and disappeared inside. She remained below ground for approximately 12 minutes before emerging without the tray, carefully locking the door behind her. Ray made another note. Cellar. Locked from outside. Food delivery. His instincts flared. Who keeps a cellar locked from the outside? And why bring food there when the house had a perfectly good kitchen? At noon, the stepmother got into her car, a worn sedan with faded blue paint, and drove away. Ray checked his watch, timing her absence. If she followed a regular schedule, this information could be crucial. She returned at 12:47 p.m. with grocery bags. After taking them inside, she walked around the perimeter of the house, looking up at windows and checking doors. The behavior seemed odd, almost like someone making sure a fortress was secure. At 1:30, she returned to the locked cellar door, this time retrieving the tray she'd left earlier. When she lifted it, Ray could see through his binoculars that the food was untouched. The woman's face tightened with what looked like anger before she went back inside. Ray lowered his binoculars, thinking. The untouched food was troubling. Was someone being punished? Refusing to eat? Too sick to eat? None of the possibilities were good. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Ray observed one final disturbing detail. The woman spent several minutes standing in the yard, staring up at one particular section of the roof, the area directly above where Ray had found Emma in the attic. She seemed to be listening, waiting for something. Then she picked up a broom from the porch and struck it hard against the side of the house 3 times. The sound would have carried easily to the attic. A warning? A signal? Ray wrote down the time. 2:13 p.m. Whatever game the stepmother was playing, it was becoming clearer by the hour that something very wrong was happening in that farmhouse. And it wasn't just about a girl in an attic anymore. Ray waited until 4:30 p.m., when the stepmother's car once again rolled down the driveway. He'd watched her routine all day, noting she typically spent about an hour in town during her afternoon trips. It wasn't much time, but it would have to be enough. He approached the house cautiously, circling to the spot where the loose panel provided access to the attic. The afternoon sun beat down on his back as he pried it open and hoisted himself inside. The attic was stifling in the late afternoon heat. Dust particles danced in the thin beams of light that squeezed through tiny cracks in the roof. Ray crouched low, moving carefully across the old wooden boards toward the small figure huddled in the corner. Emma sat cross-legged on a thin blanket, her small hands busy tying knots in a piece of string. She looked up as Ray approached, her eyes widening with recognition and relief. "You came back," she whispered. Ray nodded, settling down beside her. "Told you I would, didn't I?" He pulled a small paper bag from inside his jacket. "Brought you something." Emma peeked inside the bag to find an apple, a granola bar, and a small bottle of water. She took the water first, drinking thirstily. "Thank you," she said softly, breaking off a piece of the granola bar. "I get so hungry sometimes." Ray watched her eat, noticing how she took small, careful bites, savoring each one. His eyes drifted to the corner where a small bucket sat, a pathetic bathroom setup. His jaw tightened. "Emma," he said gently, "I need to ask you something important." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I saw your stepmother going to the cellar today. She took food down there." Emma's chewing slowed. She set down the granola bar. "Is there someone else here? Someone besides you who needs help?" Emma pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. "There used to be," she said so quietly, Ray had to lean closer to hear. "Not anymore." A chill ran through Ray despite the heat. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Emma's eyes darted to the vent in the wall. Ray reached out and lightly touched her shoulder. "It's okay. She's gone to town. We've got time." Emma seemed to gather herself, straightening her small shoulders. "I wasn't always in the attic," she began. "After Daddy died, I lived downstairs with her. But I wasn't supposed to go in the cellar." Ray nodded encouragingly. "One night I heard voices. I was thirsty and wanted water." Emma's voice grew steadier as she spoke, as if telling the story was releasing something tight inside her. "I saw the cellar door open a little bit. There was a light. I heard her talking to someone." "What happened, Emma?" "I peeked through the door. There was a man tied to a chair." Emma's voice trembled slightly. He had tape on his mouth. She was asking him about money. Ray felt his blood run cold, but kept his face calm. "Did you know the man?" Emma shook her head. "He had a fancy watch and nice shoes. She kept saying he took something from her." Ray's mind raced. A kidnapping? Extortion? Whatever it was, it went far beyond simply locking away a stepdaughter. "What happened then, Emma?" "She saw me." Emma's voice dropped even lower. "She was so angry. She grabbed me and said I was bad, that I'd ruin everything." Emma's fingers twisted in her lap. "The next morning, the man was gone, and she put me up here." "Did she say what happened to him?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "She said he went away. But then, I heard her in the yard that night, digging." Ray felt sick. He'd seen the freshly turned earth near the edge of the property. He'd thought it was a garden. "She said if I told anyone what I saw, I'd go away too." Emma looked up at Ray, her eyes suddenly fierce despite her tears. "But I don't want to go away. And I don't want her to hurt anyone else." Ray gently took Emma's small hand in his rough one. The contrast was stark, her delicate fingers against his calloused palm. But in that moment, he made a silent vow. This child had been brave enough to survive, to watch, to remember. Now it was his turn to be brave enough to act. "You're not going anywhere, Emma," Ray promised. "And neither am I." The sun hung low in the sky, painting the countryside in shades of amber and gold as Ray eased his motorcycle to a stop in a small grove of trees about half a mile from the farmhouse. He cut the engine and dismounted, his movements deliberate and quiet. The evening air carried the sweet scent of hay from nearby fields, mingling with the earthy smell of approaching night. Ray zipped up his leather jacket against the growing chill. Emma's words echoed in his mind, each detail cementing his resolve. He'd spent the afternoon in town, asking casual questions at the local diner about the farmhouse and its occupants. The information had been sparse. The stepmother kept to herself, rarely socialized, and had moved to town about 5 years ago with her new husband, who had since passed away. "Convenient," Ray muttered to himself as he began walking toward the property, sticking to the tree line. He carried a small backpack containing a flashlight, a multi-tool, and a digital camera he'd purchased at the drugstore. His phone was fully charged, ready to document anything he might find. As dusk deepened into twilight, Ray circled behind the farmhouse, careful to stay out of sight of the windows where yellow light spilled onto the overgrown lawn. The property stretched about 3 acres, most of it unkempt except for a gravel driveway and a small, tended garden near the back porch. Beyond that, tall grass gave way to clusters of trees, and what looked like an old shed about 100 yards from the house. Ray paused, scanning the area carefully. Emma had mentioned hearing digging at night. His eyes settled on several spots where the earth appeared disturbed, not the careful rows of the vegetable garden, but irregular patches scattered near the tree line. He approached one such area, pulling out his flashlight, but keeping it pointed downward to minimize its visibility. The earth here had been turned over recently, but weeds were already beginning to reclaim it. Ray knelt, running his hand over the soil. It felt different from the surrounding ground, looser, less compacted. "What are you hiding?" he whispered, digging his fingers slightly into the dirt. His search continued methodically, as darkness fell completely. Ray moved from one disturbed patch of earth to another, looking for anything unusual. At the third spot, near a large oak tree, he noticed something reflecting the beam of his flashlight. Something small and metallic, partially buried in the soil. Ray carefully brushed away the dirt, revealing a cufflink. Gold-toned with a dark blue stone, it was clearly expensive, the kind worn by a man with fancy shoes, as Emma had described. He photographed it where it lay, then carefully placed it in a small plastic bag from his pocket. The discovery spurred him onward. Ray turned his attention to the old shed, its weathered boards silvery in the moonlight that now filtered through the trees. The padlock on the door was new, incongruously shiny against the aged wood. Too obvious, Ray murmured. Whatever the stepmother was hiding, she wouldn't keep it somewhere so clearly secured. Instead, he circled the structure, noting a small window at the back, its glass filthy with years of grime. Ray wiped a small section clean with his sleeve and shone his flashlight inside. The beam revealed garden tools hanging on walls, bags of fertilizer, and a workbench, standard shed contents. But as he swept the light across the dirt floor, he noticed something odd. A section of the ground appeared more even, more deliberately packed than the rest. In one corner, the dirt floor gave way to what looked like a trapdoor, its outline barely visible. Ray's heart quickened. He tried the window, but it was secured from inside. He'd need to come back with better tools to investigate further. As he turned to leave, his foot struck something partially buried in the soft ground near the shed's foundation. Ray crouched down, brushing away soil to reveal a small metal box, the kind used for storing ammunition. It was rusted along the edges, but had clearly not been there for years, just long enough to be partially reclaimed by the earth. With careful fingers, Ray pried it open. Inside lay a man's wallet, emptied of cash, but still containing credit cards and a driver's license. The face in the photo was unfamiliar, but the name struck Ray immediately. William Mercer, a businessman reported missing from a nearby town 8 months ago. Ray documented everything with his camera before carefully replacing the box exactly as he'd found it. He had what he needed, concrete evidence connecting Emma's story to a real crime. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when Ray parked his motorcycle outside the county sheriff's office. The building stood solid and official with its brick facade and American flag hanging limp in the still morning air. Ray took a deep breath, adjusting the backpack containing his evidence. His hands were steady, but his stomach churned with urgency. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Ray approached the front desk. The deputy on duty, a young man with close-cropped hair, looked up with immediate wariness at the sight of Ray's leather vest and weathered appearance. "Can I help you?" the deputy asked, his tone professional but guarded. "I need to speak with whoever's in charge," Ray said, keeping his voice calm and measured. "It's about a child in danger and possible connection to a missing person case." The deputy's expression shifted slightly. "Wait here." 5 minutes later, Ray sat across from Sheriff Daniels, a tall woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her office was sparse but orderly, with a wall of commendations and a window overlooking the town square. "Deputy Haynes says you have information about a child?" she began. Ray nodded, unzipping his backpack. "Yesterday evening, I found this buried on the Mercer property on County Road 16. He placed the plastic bag containing the cufflink on her desk, followed by printed photographs of the disturbed earth, the metal box, and the driver's license. "William Mercer," Sheriff Daniels said quietly, examining the license photo. "Went missing 8 months ago. Last seen at a business meeting about 30 miles from here." Her eyes lifted to Ray's face. "And the child?" "6-year-old girl named Emma. Kept locked in the attic by her stepmother." Ray's voice remained steady, but his jaw tightened. "I found her 3 days ago. Been trying to figure out how to help her since. Why didn't you report this immediately?" The sheriff's tone sharpened. "I did. Came in 2 days ago, but no one believed me." Ray met her gaze directly. "Without evidence. I was just a biker making wild claims." Sheriff Daniels' expression remained neutral, but she nodded slowly. Tell me everything, from the beginning. For 20 minutes, Ray recounted the full story, finding Emma, her careful words about witnessing something through the floorboards, the surveillance through the vent, the nighttime digging she'd heard. He explained how the stepmother kept Emma isolated and threatened, how the child had memorized routines and waited for someone who could help. Emma mentioned a man with fancy shoes who visited and never left. Ray concluded. She heard arguing, then a loud noise. After that, she heard digging in the yard at night. Sheriff Daniels studied the evidence again, her expression grave. Mr. Callahan, tampering with a potential crime scene is a serious matter. I know, but leaving a 6-year-old girl up there was worse. Ray leaned forward, hands clasped. She's smart and brave, but she's terrified. She needs help now. The sheriff picked up her phone. I'll need a statement from you, and you'll have to stay available for further questioning. She paused, giving Ray a measured look. But we'll check this out immediately. Within an hour, 2 patrol cars and an unmarked vehicle rolled up the gravel drive to the farmhouse. Lights flashing, but sirens silent. Ray waited in the sheriff's car as instructed, watching as officers approached the house. The stepmother appeared at the door, her face a mask of polite confusion that quickly transformed to alarm as Sheriff Daniels explained their purpose. Ray couldn't hear the conversation, but he could see the stepmother's gestures becoming increasingly agitated, her head shaking in denial. When the sheriff produced a warrant, the woman's shoulders slumped visibly. 2 officers entered the house, while others began examining the property. Ray's hands gripped his knees as minutes stretched painfully. Finally, the front door opened again, and a female deputy emerged, her arm protectively around a small figure. Emma blinked in the morning sunlight, one hand shielding her eyes, the other clutching a small, stuffed rabbit. She looked even smaller outside, her thin frame dwarfed by the open sky above her. For a moment, she seemed frozen in place, overwhelmed by the vastness of the world beyond her attic. Then her gaze found Ray, sitting in the police car. Her face transformed, relief washing over her features like a wave. The deputy guided her toward a waiting car, where a woman in civilian clothes, likely a social worker, waited with an open door. As Emma passed the sheriff's vehicle, she paused, her eyes meeting Ray's. The smallest smile touched her lips. Not of happiness exactly, but of recognition, of trust fulfilled. The social worker helped Emma into the back seat of the car, speaking in gentle tones that Ray couldn't quite hear from where he sat. He watched as the little girl settled in, her small hands still clutching the stuffed rabbit. The rabbit was worn and faded, one ear slightly frayed, the kind of well-loved toy that had been hugged through countless nights of fear and loneliness. Sheriff Daniels approached Ray's window and tapped lightly. He rolled it down, his eyes still fixed on Emma. They'll take her to the hospital for evaluation first, the sheriff explained. Standard procedure in these cases. Make sure she's physically okay. Get her some food. Clean clothes. Her voice softened slightly. Child Services will handle things from there. Ray nodded, unable to find words. A strange tightness had formed in his chest, making it difficult to speak. You did the right thing, bringing this to us, Sheriff Daniels continued. We've got officers searching the property now, and the stepmother is being taken in for questioning. In the distance, Ray could see the woman being escorted to a patrol car, her face now twisted with anger, rather than the calm mask she'd worn before. Her eyes darted toward Emma's car with a look that made Ray's hands clench into fists. What happens to Emma now? Ray asked, his voice rougher than he intended. She'll go into emergency foster care until we sort everything out. They have good people who handle cases like this. The sheriff studied his face. You seem pretty invested in this child's welfare, Mr. Callahan. Ray shifted in his seat. Just want to make sure she's safe. We'll need your full statement at the station, Sheriff Daniels said. But first, would you like a moment to say goodbye? Might help her feel more secure knowing you're not just disappearing. Ray hadn't expected this kindness. He nodded and stepped out of the car, following the sheriff to where Emma waited. The social worker looked up as they approached, her expression cautious but not unkind. "Emma," the sheriff said gently, "Mr. Callahan wanted to say goodbye before you go to get checked out by the doctors." Emma's eyes, wide and solemn, fixed on Ray's face. The social worker moved aside slightly to give them a moment. Ray crouched down to eye level with Emma, feeling awkward and oversized next to her small frame in the car seat. Up close, the reality of her situation was even more apparent. Her clothes were clean, but too small. Her hair neatly combed but in need of trimming. Her skin pale from months without sunlight. "Hey," he said softly. "You did real good in there. Real brave." Emma nodded, her fingers tightening around the rabbit. "They said I have to go to the hospital." "Yeah, just to make sure you're okay," Ray assured her. "They've got nice doctors who'll take care of you." "And then where?" Her voice was quiet but steady, the voice of a child who had learned to face hard truths. Ray glanced up at the social worker, then back to Emma. "They've got safe places for kids to stay, people who know how to help." Emma absorbed this information, her face serious. "Will you come see me?" The question caught Ray off guard. In all his planning to help her, he hadn't thought beyond the rescue. His life wasn't made for follow-through or long-term connections. He was a man who moved on, who kept to himself. He began, not knowing how to answer. The social worker stepped forward gently. "We need to get going, sweetie. The doctors are waiting." The car door began to close, and Emma's composure finally cracked. Her eyes widened with sudden fear, and she reached one small hand toward Ray. It wasn't a grab or a dramatic gesture, just an outstretched hand, a silent question. Ray stood frozen as the car door clicked shut. Through the window, Emma's eyes held his, not pleading or crying, but asking a question he wasn't sure he could answer. Would he stay, or would he disappear like everyone else in her life had done? Ray sat on a hard plastic chair in the sheriff's office, his large frame making the seat seem impossibly small. The room smelled of coffee and paper, with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead. He'd been waiting for almost 2 hours after giving his statement, watching deputies and officers move through the hallway with purpose. Sheriff Daniels finally returned, accompanied by a man in a dark suit, who introduced himself as Detective Markham from the county prosecutor's office. The detective's face was grave as he settled into the chair across from Ray. "Mr. Callahan," Detective Markham began, "we appreciate your cooperation today. The child is safe at the hospital, and that's the most important thing." Ray nodded, relieved at least about that. "How's she doing?" "Physically, she appears undernourished, but not critically so. The doctors will know more after a full examination." The detective shuffled some papers. "However, I need to be straight with you about where we stand legally." Sheriff Daniels leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "We've been questioning Mrs. Harmon for several hours. She's denying everything." "But Emma," Ray started. "Says she was kept in the attic, yes," the detective continued. "But Mrs. Harmon claims the child was never restricted to that space. She says Emma often played up there by choice because she's troubled." Ray's jaw tightened. "Troubled? She was locked up there." "We found no locks on the attic door, Mr. Callahan. There was a loose panel outside. That's how I got in." Which Mrs. Harmon explains as poor home maintenance. She claims she had no idea anyone could access the attic that way. The detective's voice remained neutral. She also provided documentation showing Emma has a history of behavioral issues and was receiving homeschooling under medical recommendation. Ray stared at them in disbelief. "You're saying you believe her?" "I'm saying the case isn't straightforward." Detective Markham spread his hands. "We have your word against hers. We have a child who, yes, was found in an attic, but without clear evidence of forced confinement." "What about the crime Emma says she witnessed?" Sheriff Daniels stepped forward. "Emma mentioned seeing something bad happen to someone who went away. That's vague, Mr. Callahan. No names, no clear description of what occurred. She's 6 years old. Ray's voice rose slightly. And terrified. I understand your frustration, Detective Markham said. We're not dismissing her claims. We'll investigate thoroughly. But right now, we lack sufficient evidence to hold Mrs. Harmon on serious charges. Ray felt the weight of failure settling on his shoulders. He'd promised Emma, even if not in words, that he would keep her safe. So, what happens now? You just send Emma back to her? Absolutely not, Sheriff Daniels said firmly. Child Protective Services has emergency custody for now. There will be a hearing, and Emma will remain in foster care while we investigate further. But without evidence? We'll keep looking, the detective assured him. We're getting warrants to search the property more thoroughly. If there's something to find, we'll find it. Ray studied both their faces, sensing there was more they weren't saying. But the detective and sheriff exchanged glances. Mrs. Harmon has already contacted her lawyer, Sheriff Daniels said, and she's made some accusations about you. Ray's expression darkened. What kind of accusations? She's suggesting you've developed an unhealthy interest in the child, that you've been watching the house, trespassing on their property. I was trying to help Emma. Ray stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. We understand that, Detective Markham said, raising a calming hand. But your background. My background. Ray's voice was dangerously quiet. Your association with the Hells Angels, your previous record. That was 15 years ago. Nevertheless, the detective continued, it complicates matters. Mrs. Harmon is painting a picture of you as someone unreliable, potentially dangerous. Sheriff Daniels stepped closer. Mr. Callahan, we're not questioning your intentions, but for now, we need you to stay away from the case. Stay away? Ray's hands clenched at his sides. No contact with Emma. No visits to the Harmon property. No interference with the investigation. The sheriff's tone was firm. If you want to help that little girl, the best thing you can do right now is let us handle this by the book. Ray slammed the door of his motel room and threw his leather jacket onto the bed. The cheap lamp on the nightstand rattled. The walls of the small room seemed to close in around him as he paced back and forth. 5 steps one way, 5 steps back. His boots made hollow sounds on the thin carpet. Stay away, he muttered, mimicking the sheriff's words. Let us handle it. The last rays of sunlight slipped through gaps in the worn curtains, painting orange stripes across the room. Ray stopped at the small table by the window and gripped the back of a chair until his knuckles turned white. The faces of the detective and sheriff flashed in his mind. Their doubt, their warnings, their judgment of who he was, based on patches on his jacket and mistakes from 15 years ago. He grabbed his phone and scrolled through the pictures he'd taken of the farmhouse, distant shots of the property, the loose panel, even a careful photo of the attic space when Emma wasn't looking. Nothing that proved imprisonment. Nothing concrete enough to keep Emma safe. Damn it, he growled, tossing the phone onto the bed. Ray sank into the chair and buried his face in his hands. The clock on the wall ticked loudly in the silence. Each second that passed was another second Emma was alone, surrounded by strangers, probably terrified. She'd looked back at him as they took her away, those big, solemn eyes asking a question he couldn't answer. The memory of her small hand in his burned in his mind. How carefully she'd held on, as if touch itself was unfamiliar. The way she'd whispered about staying brave, about waiting for someone like him. He stood up abruptly and walked to the bathroom, splashing cold water on his face. The man who looked back from the mirror was someone he barely recognized. Worry lines around his eyes, tension in his jaw. When had he started caring this much? When had Emma slipped past the walls he'd built around himself? Ray grabbed a towel and dried his face roughly. The sheriff's warning echoed in his ears. If he pushed too hard, he could make things worse. His presence alone could damage Emma's case. But if he walked away, the image of Emma back in that attic made his stomach turn. Or worse, back with her stepmother, who now knew Emma had told someone the truth. Outside his window, cars passed on the highway, their headlights briefly illuminating the room before fading away. Each one going somewhere, leaving this place behind. He could do that too. Get on his bike, hit the road, tell himself he'd done what he could. It would be easier, safer, smarter. Ray walked to the bed and picked up his jacket, feeling its familiar weight. He'd spent years avoiding connections, avoiding responsibility for anyone but himself. The road had been his escape, a place where the past couldn't catch up, where he answered to no one. He ran his thumb over the worn leather, then over the patches that marked him as someone to fear, someone to avoid. "You don't look scared of her," Emma had whispered that first day. Ray closed his eyes. The truth hit him like a physical blow. He was scared now, not of Emma's stepmother, but of failing this child who had trusted him when trust must have seemed impossible to her. He set the jacket down and pulled out a small notepad from the bedside drawer. Lowering himself onto the edge of the bed, Ray began writing. Everything he remembered. Every detail Emma had shared. Every observation he'd made about the farmhouse. If the authorities needed evidence, he would find it. If they needed a witness, he would be it. The path ahead was unclear and dangerous. His presence could complicate Emma's case. The authorities had warned him away. But Ray knew with sudden certainty that he couldn't ride away this time. Some roads, once taken, changed everything. And the road that had led him to Emma's attic wasn't one he could turn back from. Emma sat on the edge of the strange bed, her small legs dangling above the floor. The room was nice, much nicer than the attic, with yellow walls and a window that actually opened. Sunlight streamed across the colorful quilt, warm against her skin. But it didn't feel safe. Nothing felt safe without Ray. "Are you hungry, sweetheart?" Ms. Lawson asked from the doorway. She was the social worker assigned to Emma's case, a tall woman with kind eyes and a voice that tried too hard to sound cheerful. Emma nodded politely. She'd learned long ago that being quiet and agreeable kept trouble away. "Pancakes? Toast? Cereal?" Ms. Lawson offered, stepping into the room. "Whatever is easy." Emma replied softly, her fingers tracing the pattern on the quilt. Her answer made Ms. Lawson's smile falter a little. "You can choose, Emma. It's okay to want things." Emma looked up at her, studying her face. Adults said things like that, but they didn't always mean them. Still, the woman seemed nice enough. "Pancakes, please," Emma whispered. "But only if it's not too much trouble." Ms. Lawson nodded and gestured toward the hallway. "Come on then. You can watch me make them." Emma followed her to the kitchen of the small house that served as a temporary placement home. The space was bright and clean, with cheerful blue curtains and plants on the windowsill, so different from the dusty corners and cobwebs she'd grown used to. As Ms. Lawson mixed pancake batter, Emma perched on a stool, watching every movement. The social worker kept talking, gentle, easy words about the weather, about the flowers outside, about how Emma would meet her temporary foster family soon. Emma nodded at the right moments but remained watchful. "You're very observant," Ms. Lawson commented as she poured batter onto the hot griddle. Emma shrugged slightly. "I had to be." The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ms. Lawson turned, spatula in hand, her expression softening. "Yes, I imagine you did." She flipped a pancake with practiced ease. "Emma, do you know why we're asking so many questions about what happened at that house?" Emma's hands folded tightly in her lap. "To see if I'm telling the truth." Ms. Lawson placed a plate of pancakes in front of her. "To help you, and to make sure your stepmother can't hurt anyone else." Emma picked up her fork, but didn't eat. "She said no one would believe me, because I'm just a kid." "I believe you," Ms. Lawson said firmly, "but we need to understand everything that happened." Emma cut a small piece of pancake, chewing slowly as she considered this. Ray had believed her too. He hadn't needed proof or explanations. He'd just known she was telling the truth. "The man who found me," Emma said suddenly. "Ray. Is he in trouble?" Ms. Lawson hesitated. "No, he's not in trouble. But this is a complicated situation." "He helped me," Emma insisted, her voice growing stronger. "He wasn't scared of her." "I know, honey," Ms. Lawson said gently. "But right now, we need to focus on keeping you safe." Emma nodded and took another bite, falling silent again. The kitchen clock ticked loudly on the wall. Outside, a bird chirped in a nearby tree. The pancakes were good, fluffy and warm, but Emma couldn't enjoy them. Something was pulling at her mind, like a loose thread on a sweater. After breakfast, Ms. Lawson took her to a small office, where a kind-faced woman named Dr. Morris asked her more questions. They were careful questions about the attic, about her stepmother, about what she'd seen. Emma answered them truthfully, but briefly. "Emma," Dr. Morris said gently, "you mentioned to the officers yesterday that you saw something bad happen. Can you tell me about that?" Emma's hands twisted in her lap. The memory floated back, not just in feelings and shadows, but in sharp, clear details. The kind of details that made grown-ups listen. "It was a Tuesday," she said quietly. "I know because the mail truck comes on Tuesdays, and I could hear it from the vent." Dr. Morris nodded encouragingly, making a note. "There was a man who came to the door," Emma continued, her voice growing steadier. "He had papers. I could see through the crack in the floor, the one by the heating pipe. He was wearing a blue jacket with a name tag, Anderson, like the street sign near the big tree." Emma's eyes grew distant as the memory sharpened. They were arguing about money. He said she had to pay, or he would report her. She invited him in for coffee. Emma's voice grew stronger as she recalled more details. "He drank from a blue mug, the one with the chip on the handle. I remember because she never let anyone use that mug. She said it was special." Dr. Morris nodded, writing notes while maintaining eye contact with Emma. "They went to the basement," Emma continued. "I couldn't see them anymore, but I could hear. First they were talking normal, then they were yelling." She paused, her small fingers tracing invisible patterns on the chair's armrest. Then there was a really loud sound, like something heavy fell. Then it got quiet. Ms. Lawson, who had been sitting quietly in the corner, exchanged glances with Dr. Morris. "What happened next, Emma?" Dr. Morris asked gently. She came upstairs alone. Her shirt had red spots on it. She was breathing hard, and her hands were shaking. Emma's eyes grew distant. She washed her hands for a long time in the kitchen sink. Then she looked up, right at the vent, where she knew I could see. She said if I ever told anyone what I saw, I would disappear too. The room fell silent except for the scratch of Dr. Morris's pen against paper. "Emma," Ms. Lawson said, leaning forward, "do you remember when this happened? What day or month?" Emma nodded. "It was after my birthday, but before Christmas. I know because I could see the neighbors' pumpkins from my window, but they didn't have Christmas lights yet." "October or November," Ms. Lawson murmured to Dr. Morris. "There's more," Emma said, her voice suddenly urgent. "The man's car stayed in our driveway for 3 days. It was white with a blue logo on the side. Then one night, I heard her car leave really late. When she came back, the man's car was gone." Dr. Morris set down her pen. "Emma, this is incredibly helpful. You have an amazing memory for details." "I had lots of time to remember," Emma said simply. "There wasn't much else to do in the attic." Ms. Lawson knelt beside Emma's chair. "You're being very brave. Would you mind talking to the police officers again and telling them exactly what you just told us?" Emma hesitated, her eyes growing anxious. "Will Ray be there?" "We can ask if he can visit you soon," Ms. Lawson replied carefully. "But, right now, it's important that you speak with the officers." Emma looked down at her hands, then back up with newfound determination in her eyes. "The man who came, his jacket had words under his name tag. County Financial Services. I practiced reading it over and over from the floorboards. Within the hour, Emma sat in a brighter room with two officers, repeating her story. This time, she added even more details: the time of day, the sound of the man's voice, the specific words of the argument she had overheard. One officer recorded, while another asked gentle questions. By late afternoon, search warrants were being prepared. Emma's precise details about dates, the visitor's identity, and the vehicle had provided enough specificity to justify a thorough investigation. Detective Harmon, a serious woman with sharp eyes, entered the room where Emma waited with Ms. Lawson. "Emma," Detective Harmon said, her voice gentle but direct, "we found records of a County Financial Services employee named Michael Anderson, who disappeared last October. His car was found abandoned 50 miles from here, but he never was." She knelt to Emma's eye level. "Your information matches several unsolved questions in his case." Ms. Lawson squeezed Emma's shoulder supportively. "We're sending a forensic team to examine the basement of your stepmother's house," Detective Harmon continued. "The judge approved it, based largely on your statement." Emma nodded solemnly. "Will they look behind the big shelf? The one that wasn't there before?" Detective Harmon's eyebrows raised. "What shelf, Emma?" "After the loud noise, I heard scraping for a long time. The next day I saw her bringing bags of concrete into the house. Then she moved the big bookshelf from the living room down to the basement. She never did that kind of work before." Detective Harmon stood quickly and stepped aside, speaking urgently into her radio. When she returned, her expression was both gentle and determined. "Emma, you've been more help than you can possibly imagine," she said. "We're going to make sure you stay safe." For the first time since leaving the farmhouse, Emma felt the tight knot in her chest begin to loosen. Maybe adults would believe her after all. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farmhouse as 3 police vehicles pulled into the gravel driveway. Detective Harmon stepped out first, followed by several officers and a forensics team carrying equipment. Yellow police tape already surrounded the property from yesterday's initial search, fluttering in the cool morning breeze. Inside, Linda Mercer sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped tightly around a coffee mug. She had been under house arrest since the previous afternoon when officers had begun searching the property. An officer stood by the back door, watching her carefully. "Mrs. Mercer," Detective Harmon said as she entered the kitchen, her voice steady and controlled. "We need to speak with you about our findings." Linda's face remained blank. "I've already told you everything. That child has always been troubled. Making up stories is what she does." Detective Harmon placed a folder on the table and pulled out a chair. She sat down directly across from Linda, making eye contact. "We found something in your basement last night," she said. "Behind the bookshelf." Linda's fingers tightened around her mug, but her expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The concrete was fresh, Mrs. Mercer. Less than a year old. Ground-penetrating radar showed something underneath." Detective Harmon's voice remained calm. "We obtained an emergency order to break through it." A small tremor ran through Linda's hands, causing coffee to slosh over the rim of her mug. She quickly set it down. "This is ridiculous," Linda said. "You can't just destroy my property based on the fantasies of a disturbed child." Detective Harmon opened the folder and slid a photograph across the table. "We found human remains, Mrs. Mercer." Linda's eyes flicked to the photo, then away. She pushed her chair back slightly. "We've also located Michael Anderson's briefcase," Detective Harmon continued, producing another photograph. "County Financial Services confirmed it belongs to him. Their records show he was scheduled to meet with you on October 23rd last year, his last appointment before he disappeared." Outside, the forensics team continued to move equipment into the house. Through the window, Linda watched them with growing agitation. "I want my lawyer," she said finally. That's your right. Detective Harmon nodded. But before we make that call, there's something else you should know. She produced another document from her folder. We found these in Anderson's briefcase. Foreclosure notices for this property. According to his notes, you were 6 months behind on payments. He was here to discuss final arrangements before the bank took possession. Linda's face hardened. This proves nothing. We also found blood evidence on the underside of the basement stairs. The type matches Anderson's. Detective Harmon's tone remained level. Emma described hearing a loud noise, like something heavy falling. She described seeing you with red spots on your shirt afterward. She remembered everything, Mrs. Mercer, every detail. Linda's composure finally cracked. She was supposed to be asleep. I checked. She was in bed before he arrived. The officer by the door straightened, alert now. Detective Harmon didn't react to the outburst. Is that why you locked her in the attic? Because she saw? She wouldn't stop asking questions, Linda said, her voice rising. Going on and on about where the man went, why his car was still here. She wouldn't shut up about it. So, you hid her away, Detective Harmon said. Linda's eyes darted around the room like those of a trapped animal. What was I supposed to do? She would have told someone. I was about to lose everything. The house, everything. He wouldn't give me more time. Detective Harmon closed her folder and stood up. Linda Mercer, you're under arrest for the murder of Michael Anderson and the unlawful imprisonment and endangerment of Emma Carter. She nodded to the officer by the door, who stepped forward with handcuffs. You don't understand, Linda said, her voice suddenly desperate as the officer pulled her to her feet. That child isn't right. She watches everything, remembers everything. No child should be that way. Detective Harmon recited Linda's rights as the handcuffs clicked into place. 2 more officers entered the kitchen to escort her out. As they led Linda through the front door toward the waiting police car, she caught sight of Ray's motorcycle parked across the street. He stood leaning against it, arms crossed, watching intently as the officers guided her down the steps. Linda's face contorted with anger. This is your fault, she spat in his direction. Ray said nothing, simply watching as the officers placed her in the back of the police car and shut the door. Only when the car pulled away, Linda's pale face visible through the window, did he allow himself a small nod of satisfaction. Emma was safe now. The nightmare was over. Ray sat in his truck outside the Children's Services building, drumming his fingers nervously against the steering wheel. The afternoon sun made the brick building glow warm and orange, but it did little to settle the knot in his stomach. He'd gotten the call just an hour ago. Linda Mercer had confessed to everything after being confronted with the evidence. The case was closed. Emma was officially safe. He pulled down the sun visor and checked his reflection, running a hand through his hair. He'd trimmed his beard that morning and traded his leather vest for a clean flannel shirt. Small changes that wouldn't fool anyone about who he was. But still, he wanted to try. A social worker named Diane had told him Emma had been asking for him. She'd arranged this visit, bending rules she normally wouldn't. That little girl needs to see you, she'd said over the phone. She needs to know you didn't disappear too. Ray took a deep breath and got out of his truck. The weight of uncertainty slowed his steps as he approached the building. What if Emma was different now? What if the trauma of everything, the attic, the questioning, the temporary foster home had changed her? What if she blamed him for not getting her out sooner? The front desk attendant looked up as he entered, her eyes widening slightly at his appearance. Ray cleared his throat. I'm here to see Emma Carter, he said, his voice rough but quiet. Diane should be expecting me. The woman nodded and made a quick phone call. Moments later, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and practical shoes appeared. You must be Ray, she said, extending her hand. I'm Diane. Thank you for coming. Ray shook her hand, surprised by her firm grip. "How is she?" Diane's smile was genuine. "Resilient. Remarkable, actually. She's been telling us about the whistling you taught her." Something in Ray's chest loosened slightly. "She's in the visiting room," Diane continued, gesturing down a hallway. "I should warn you, she's been very quiet since hearing about her stepmother's arrest. She understands what happened, but she's processing a lot." Ray nodded. He understood processing. Sometimes it took years. Diane led him to a room filled with bright colors and small tables. Child-made artwork covered the walls, and shelves of toys and books lined one side. The cheerfulness of it all felt strange against the heaviness of what had happened. And there, sitting alone at a table by the window, was Emma. Her hair was brushed and pulled back with a clip. She wore clean clothes that looked new, a blue shirt with a butterfly on the front and jeans. She was coloring intently, her small hand gripping a crayon with focus. She looked both the same and different in the sunlight. No longer the shadow girl from the attic, but not quite a carefree child either. Ray hesitated in the doorway, suddenly unsure. "Emma," Diane called gently. "You have a visitor." Emma looked up, her eyes finding Ray immediately. For one heart-stopping moment, her expression remained completely blank. Ray stood perfectly still, barely breathing. Then her face transformed. Her eyes widened, brightened, and her mouth broke into a smile so big it seemed to illuminate her entire being. She dropped her crayon and pushed her chair back with a screech against the floor. "Ray!" she cried, the first truly loud sound he'd ever heard her make. Before he could respond, she was running toward him, moving with a freedom and abandon he'd never seen in her before. No careful steps, no quiet caution, just pure, unrestrained emotion. She crashed into his legs, wrapping her arms around him tightly, burying her face against him. "You came back," she said, her voice muffled against his jeans. "You really came back." Ray kneeled down, bringing himself to her level. His hands were gentle as he returned her hug, careful not to hold too tight. "I told you I would, kid," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I keep my promises." Emma pulled back just enough to look at his face, studying him with those observant eyes that had memorized everything in her world to survive. "They told me I don't have to go back there ever again," she said. "They said she can't hurt anyone anymore." "That's right," Ray nodded. "You're safe now, for real." Emma's small hand reached up to touch his beard, a gesture so trusting it made his throat tighten. "Thank you for finding me," she whispered. 3 weeks had passed since Emma moved in with the Parkers. Their modest home sat on a quiet street, lined with maple trees that were just starting to show hints of fall colors. Ray's motorcycle rumbled down the street, slowing as he approached the white 2-story house with blue shutters. He parked at the curb, cutting the engine and removing his helmet. Under his arm, he carried a small brown paper package tied with string. It wasn't much, just a children's book about a brave little bird that builds its nest in unusual places. The bookstore lady had recommended it when Ray had awkwardly explained he needed something for a 6-year-old who liked to sing. He checked his watch. 4 o'clock, right on time for his Tuesday visit. The Parkers had been kind enough to establish a regular schedule for him to visit Emma, twice a week, like clockwork. Mrs. Parker opened the door before he could knock, greeting him with a warm smile. She was in her 50s, with salt and pepper hair and gentle eyes that crinkled at the corners. "She's been watching the window for the past hour," Mrs. Parker said, stepping aside. "I've never seen a child so aware of time without knowing how to read a clock." Ray nodded. "She's good at patterns, notices everything." The living room was cozy and lived in, with comfortable furniture and family photos on the walls. It looked nothing like the cold farmhouse Emma had been trapped in, and for that, Ray was grateful. "Ray!" Emma's voice came from the staircase. She descended carefully, one hand on the railing, but her face was bright with excitement. She wore a yellow dress with small flowers on it, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. "Hey, kid," Ray said, his rough voice softening the way it only did for her. "Got something for you." Emma approached him without hesitation now, confidence growing in her steps each time he visited. She took the package with careful hands, untying the string with deliberate focus. "A book!" she exclaimed, examining the colorful cover. "Will you read it to me?" "Sure thing," Ray said, settling onto the couch as Emma climbed up beside him. Mrs. Parker smiled. "I'll bring you both some lemonade." As Ray began to read, Emma leaned against his arm, pointing at pictures and asking questions. Her voice grew more animated with each page, a far cry from the whispers of the attic. Sometimes Ray had to remind himself that this was the same child. The one who had survived in shadows was now blooming in sunlight. After finishing the book, Ray set it aside. "Got something else planned today, if you're up for it." Emma tilted her head, curious. "What is it?" "Come outside and see." In the driveway sat a small blue bicycle with training wheels. Ray had picked it up from a second-hand shop and spent hours fixing it up, replacing the worn seat, oiling the chain, and adding new grips to the handlebars. A small silver bell was attached to the right handle. Emma's eyes widened. "Is that for me?" "Can't keep it here if it's not," Ray said with a small smile. "Thought you might want to learn how to ride." Emma approached the bicycle cautiously, touching the handlebars with gentle fingers. "I never had a bike before. First time for everything," Ray said, kneeling beside her. "What do you think?" Emma reached for the bell and gave it a tentative ring, the clear sound breaking the afternoon quiet. A smile spread across her face, the kind that started small and then took over completely. "Can we try now?" she asked. Ray nodded. "That's the plan." He showed her how to sit on the seat, where to put her feet on the pedals, and how to use the brakes. Emma listened with the same intense focus she'd used to survive her captivity, but now it was directed at something joyful. "I'll hold onto the back until you get your balance," Ray promised, as Emma gripped the handlebars tightly. "Just push down with your feet to make it go." Emma's first attempts were wobbly, her small legs pushing uncertainly on the pedals. Ray walked beside her, one hand steadying the back of the seat. They made slow circles in the driveway, Emma's concentration evident in her furrowed brow. "You're doing great, kid," Ray encouraged. "Try to look ahead, not down at your feet." Gradually, her movements became more confident. The training wheels provided stability, but Emma was learning to balance on her own. Her tentative pedaling grew stronger with each circle of the driveway. "Ring your bell," Ray suggested. Emma pressed the bell lever, and the bright sound made her laugh, a free, unrestrained sound that seemed to ripple through the afternoon air. "I'm really riding it," she called out, her voice carrying across the yard. Ray felt something loosen in his chest as he watched her. This was what freedom looked like. A little girl on a bicycle, discovering joy, one pedal at a time. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.